Okay, so getting from, I'm pretty loud. Getting from voting into money. So I'll start this out by talking about how we got to this point to ask you a question on how you feel about a boundary watershed management plan. This is something we've looked at for quite a long time, but we've looked at it through the Kettle River. We've done a lot of work with the Kettle River, and that came about because of the Cascade project. And if any of you weren't here then, it was a power project that was slated for the Cascade Falls. And at that point, a group of us got together and started to talk about that. Dave Duran was part of that. Kathy O'Malley was part of that. We had a gentleman from the States that was part of that. And we learned through all of this information that that particular project they wanted to do, not only were they giving the community nothing from it, nothing. Not power, not money, nothing. But they were taking the last recorded water license from the Kettle River. So from there, we had a committee struck, and I believe it was chaired by Ann Gordon, and Gordon was a councillor on the Grand Forks Council. And some of us that sat there said, we need to look at this from the standpoint of needing a watershed management plan for the boundary. And we started to talk about that a little bit. What happened with it, we specifically asked the councillors to take that forward. At that point, I was not elected in those days. I was just one of those people out there. And that went that way. So nothing happened at that time. At the regional district table, after I was elected in 2005, we had some people that were very interested in taking that forward. Bill Baird, who was the Area E director at that time, literally put his money where his mouth is, slapped $100 and some odd $1,000, what, 150, something like that, Donna, and said, we need a Kettle River management plan, because at that point the Kettle River was labeled an endangered river. So that's how that started. And we hired a consultant, we hired somebody to do a plan, and it went from the Kettle River to all kinds of people sitting at the table, and people sitting at the table from all over the boundary, actually, that had some input into that. We now know from the past few years that flood, fire, all of those things have a significant impact on our communities. And we don't believe that is going to be the end of that. We believe that we're going to be faced with more of these types of things. And maybe you would call it the new normal. I don't. I just say everything's going to be extreme from what it was before. So we went from there and started then talking, and of course the money at that point was coming from gas tax dollars, and that money is about to run out. So we said as a group, Rolly Russell, who's sitting back there, is the Area D director, is also the chair of the board for the regional district. And we started talking about how do we make this happen if we really believe in it. And it needs to be a boundary initiative. So that's how we got to this room tonight. Donna Dean, who is the manager for planning in Regional District and Trail, is here to talk a little bit with you about that and how that looks. And I'm sure Rolly will be also happy to chime in, should he need to. And I, of course, am very happy to chime in. We want you guys to understand what we think the reason is for this, what we believe in, but we also want you to decide whether you want your tax dollars to pay for this. Because at the end of the day, if this doesn't pass, then there will not be a watershed management plan for the boundary. It is also not a threat to the Christina Lake Stewardship, and Jeff is here, he's the president of Christina Lake Stewardship. We've got other stewardship people here as well. And thank you for being here. It's not a threat to them at all. It's a partnership. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to turn it right over to Donna and let Donna get into part of her presentation, and then we'll do some chatting as a community, okay? Great, thank you. Donna, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Grace. I promise this won't be as complicated. I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions, but it will not be as complicated.
Do you want the lights? Yeah, good.
So as Grace said, the impetus for the starting points for the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan were the Cascade Power Project, and then also the final thing that came up was a big water license that I'm not sure. I was trying to figure out when they were talking what it was that was triggering that sound. They were applying for a water license. They were going to have a golf course at the ski hill, and that was really seen as a big threat to the Kettle River, given that it dries up. We get into drought every year, and it ended up in the end that, well, they didn't build a golf course. They're now doing mountain biking there, so they're not using a whole lot of water, but it ended up being not a problem. So it ended up that the water that they were going to take to build, they were going to build a reservoir at Big White, but it was during spring freshet. So that water was all the runoff that was being captured at that time. It wasn't threatening the water in the river in July and August. So this is a picture that I took during not this year's flood, but last year's flood. And it's it's the confluence, not the confluence that we've been talking lots about with the flood being the confluence of the Granby River and the Kettle River, and all the devastation that happened in that area. But this is the confluence of Christina Creek and the Kettle River below Cascade Falls. And it shows that connection between the Kettle River and the lake. And a lot of people say, well, we're not, like I've heard that lots of times, people at the lake say, well, we're not part of the Kettle River, but you are part of the Kettle River. And this is showing the creek actually being plugged because of the high water in the river. And what happens is that then the water can't exit from the lake. And then it leads to flooding, and we saw that last year, and then we saw it again this year. So the first step after those issues were raised and what Grace was talking about, and the political will was there to spend what was mostly gas tax money, the first step was to do the, well, sorry, I gotta back up. So there is a Christina Lake Watershed Management Plan as well that was created. It was finalized in 2005. So that's the top right corners. And that was done by the Christina Lake Stewardship Society. There was regional district involvement, there was federal government and provincial government. It was a very collaborative process to create that plan. Then in 2012, we had the Kettle River Management Plan Phase 1 technical assessment. So that was a consultant out of the Okanagan that did a technical study, and the biggest recommendation that came out of that was you need to have a Kettle River Watershed Management Plan. So that's top right. It was completed in 2014. And that was done, again, it was a collaborative process, and it was Graham Watt of Commons Place Consulting. He was hired by the regional district to create that plan. It was about a 2-year process. It was endorsed by the board of directors in 2014. Then we got into the next phase, which was to prevent the plan from staying on the shelf. We actually had 3 years, so the board of directors, using gas tax money, they committed to 3 years, so that was 2015, 16, and 17, to keep Graham on, or to keep that company on, at a 40% of a full-time equivalent. So it was about a $35,000 a year contract that we had, and then we were able to start some of the implementation of the plan. In the meantime, Graham ended up getting a job. He wanted a full-time job. He ended up getting a job with the city of Grand Forks. And then another group came on, so then he hired on Jessica Mace, and now that's evolved into Collective Roots. So she carried on with that 40% full-time equivalent, trying to do this implementation. It was a challenge because 40% time doesn't really work in that, to actually get a lot of work done. So the board of directors this spring, they decided that they wanted to create a new service. So there's a bylaw was drafted, and it's been given up to third reading. It can't be adopted without electoral approval. So that's why this referendum question is going to be on the ballot on the 20th of October. So the main goals, and these are kind of drawn from both the Christina Lake Watershed Management Plan and the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan, and I grouped them into kind of four overarching goals. And one is to increase community understanding, support, and capacity for stewardship of our watershed. And that's largely through education and outreach, just having information available across the watershed in a consistent way. Encouraging land use decisions that protect water quality. And that is the staff person. I see them working with each of the local governments and helping to develop policy, for example, in official community plans that are mindful or looking through that lens of protecting water. We had, when we did for example, when we did the official community plan for electoral area D, we had Graham Watt embedded into the steering committee for that plan, and we did get a lot of really good policy in that official community plan. And so that's something that we carry on. If we had a staff person, that's what the objective is having the services, is to have a full-time staff person. The third one is to protect, enhance shorelines to help prevent erosion and improve fish and wildlife habitat. I've had a lot of questions about this. So does that mean the regional district's going to regulate? Are you going to have the riparian area regulations like the Okanagan and the Lower Mainland does? So that's a provincial legislation that does not apply to our area. There's no intent at this time to have regulations, but it would be more through that education and outreach. And then the fourth one is to manage our limited water resources during periods of drought. And this ties into a project that the consultant that we work with on the implementation right now is working on. So Collective Roots is creating a drought management plan for the whole boundary area from Christina Lake to Big White, working with all of the water purveyors in that area and coming up with plans during drought. So that we don't have to get to, like, hopefully, like sometimes you just can't prevent things like flood and drought, but to work with water conservation and try and get it so that we don't get to those level 3 droughts and level 4 droughts, or that we have a collective kind of response to it. So how much money does the service cost, and what will the money be spent on? So maximum requisition in the bylaw is $160,000. That holds for 5 years. And at the end of the 5 years, the service, the bylaw, the service would no longer exist unless 2/3 of the participants, so the 6 participants that sit at the board of directors table, unless they vote in a positive way, and 2/3 to continue with the service, then it would be, it would stop. It discontinues. So most of the money would go towards the wages for that person and for administrative support and management of that program. Building, so all the services at the regional district, if they have space in a building, then they pay towards the rent and the heat and the lights and the our internet and all those administrative things. Travel, so there'd be some travel involved because we go from Big White to Christina Lake, so there'd have to be site visits and traveling to meetings and so on, and then that goes into the next one, public participation, so having events like this where you're renting a hall or providing snacks and that sort of thing. And then there would be some room in there for for contracts, so there's about $15,000, and that money could be distributed, it would, depend on the projects that are being proposed and the work plan for that year, but we have the existing stewardship societies and other organization where we could use that money, that $15,000, and leverage it with other sources of funds and increase that and get some work. So the service area would apply to the 3 electoral areas in the boundaries, so C, Christina Lake, and D, rural Grand Forks, and E, west boundary. And the 3 municipalities, so City of Grand Forks, City of Greenwood, and Village of Midway. And when would things start? So if it is approved, but through the electorate, then staff would begin to prepare this fall along with our other work plans and our 5-year budgets. We'd be including this, and then we'd be looking at recruiting a staff member in the new year. When can you vote? So as you know, Director McGregor is in by acclamation, so there won't be a vote for a director, but there will be still polling stations for this referendum question. And so those advance polls are on Wednesday, October 10th between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. and then October 20th on the actual voting day. And that is here at the hall.
Where's the advance polls?
They're both are.
Pardon?
They're both here.
Okay.
So questions?
Yeah,
Thanks, Les.
I have a question. If this is so critical, this $160,000 a year, surely the regional district has the money to cover that. Why is it going to come out of our money?
So all the money comes from taxes.
Yeah, but we pay lots of taxes here already. We must have some money that can handle this.
So all the regional districts runs on services. So the
At the end of the
taxes,
year, there's no money.
so sometimes there is surplus money, and then that goes into the next year. So we don't just blow that money, we keep that money, and then that helps reduce taxes for the next year. Sorry, Ms.
I think it's important to understand that the regional district cannot move money. We are not allowed to. So if you have an environmental service like your garbage, whatever, you can't take that and move it over to what we might want to do with a boundary watershed. You're not allowed to do that. In the regional district, every service, John McLean's words, is operated like it's the only service we have. So you take that money and it goes to that service. That's why this is coming to you for a question. Do you want to start a new service? Because you have to in order to pay for that. Does that help? Hopefully.
Yes, very well.
Okay.
Has,
Sorry, I ask this more as devil advocate because I'm in favor of this. But what will happen if you don't get the money?
There won't be any coordinating role for this, so it will
What does that look
largely,
like?
it will largely sit on the shelf. Except for,
What
so
does
you,
that look like on the ground, is what I'm saying. Right now, I'm not
Yeah.
getting a clear idea of what this program is actually going to mean to me. I live on the river,
Yeah.
I love that river.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to pay taxes to keep that river. But what I'm not getting from this is what does that mean to me as a person who lives on the river? What difference is it going to make to have this program or not have this program?
so there won't be a person that you can call to ask questions about the river. There won't be a coordinating role for somebody to be seeking funds, to be reaching out and having all those education opportunities. But
So it's
that being said,
Can I
So-
give you another example?
Yes, please.
So one of the things that the provincial government has said is, through the revision of their Water Sustainability Act, for example, is we want more local influence and more local governance over water decisions. So this is one, I would say, the bulk of the recommendations that come out of our watershed management plans, whether that's Christina Lake or for the Kettle River watershed, which includes Christina Lake and the Granby and everything else, it surrounds that piece. So how do we come together and make more of our own decisions about our watershed? And so that's, to me, that's the biggest piece, is that if we don't have this service, then we can't implement those watersheds, and we can't get organized enough to have that coordinated say about what we want to see happen in our watershed. Not to say that we necessarily have the autonomy to make those decisions, but if we have the coordination through something like this, then we can push back to the province to say, no, we would like to see it this way or that way.
I see it as a power,
Yeah.
a regional power, which, for instance, the Christina Lake Stewardship and the Mussel Program, it took a whole group of us, including from the Okanagan, coming together and doing a video and getting pretty darn loud in order for the province to even hear us. So what we're saying, Rolly and I and Vicki, everybody else that sat at that table, is in order to have the power to get something to happen, we need collectively to work as a region.
Could you give me an example
Go ahead.
of the
Go ahead.
something to happen? What is the something that you would like to happen, given you've got this money?
I would say it's the capacity that we have built right now to be starting to make decisions about our watershed, that we don't want to lose that, and we want to continue to grow that. So a really concrete example would be, so we recognize we don't have a monitoring well in the west boundary basin. So we were lacking the knowledge of being able to say, okay, well, what is the water doing in Midway? And so we had a group of people at the Kettle River Watershed Authority, which is an advisory committee for the regional district, and it includes the forest industry, it includes the mining industry, it includes environmental groups, come together and say, okay, we want to tell the province that it's important that we have a monitoring well here. And so that recommendation then goes through the board of directors, and they received that and acted on that. And I'm convinced that if it was just the board of directors saying we want a monitoring well in Midway, that wouldn't happen. Right? So likewise, like the capacity that has been put in place around some of the invasive mussel preventative work here, that's the sort of piece that is really hard for us in local government in an area like Christina Lake or rural Grand Forks to be able to mobilize on. And this would be the sort of thing that would help us be able to make those statements in a way that the provincial government and local government pays attention to.
Thank you. That's answered my question very well. Thank you very much.
I think it might help if you broke it down to what you will pay for $1,000.
Okay, so there is a document here, there's a frequently asked questions document, and it's less than $5 per 100,000 of assessed value. So I think it's $4.85.
I think we have copies of these for them to take home.
Yes, there are lots of copies.
So if we've got a $300,000 tax assessment, it'll be $14.56
Right.
for the year. Yeah.
If that full tax requisition was taxed for, and that's the other piece, is that it's $160,000, that's the maximum that we would be allowed to tax, and the expectation is that we would start with less than that.
Okay, we've got Ellen over here, we've got several people, so we'll start with Ellen.
The criteria you've given for the work that this person will be doing is not very concrete. I'm having a little trouble understanding exactly what this person, because $160,000 is quite a lot of money. And so I would be interested to know if you could give us an idea of a job description. What kind of person is going to be hired, and then we can maybe have an idea of what this person is going to be doing. Will they be a hydrologist or an engineer? Or
They could be either of those. So it will be somebody that has at least a bachelor's degree, probably a Bachelor of Science degree. They'll be a professional biologist, or a professional forester, or a professional agrologist. Any of those things might apply. It'll depend on the person. We need somebody who understands project management, who can maybe be applying for grants, who who is a good communicator, who can go out and work with the public and can have a really good understanding and grasp of the watershed and the watershed plans and what those actions are in those plans, and then be able to work with the committee like Rolly was describing. So they'll have to be able to work well with others and collaborate and then come up with a work plan.
And their work plan will be dictated by our watershed management plans, right? So the prioritization of which pieces, that piece would be fluid, but our watershed management planning processes, that's what would drive that person's work plan.
And it's hard to know, although I think I have a draft right now, but I wrote it a couple of years ago now, and so it's hard to know at this point what exactly they're doing, because they'll have to go through that whole work planning process, but it'll be somebody with all those experiences. Yes.
I think the problem here is that people don't understand specifically what will be done. And the watershed plan is very general in nature. And the problem is, what are they going to be you need to articulate what they're going to be done, what that money is going to be spent on. The main concern, the real problem here is flood control. That's where the problem is, and that's where the money is. And that's really a provincial government. This is an international waterway. It's provincial government responsibility. The question then becomes, what is this individual details of what he's going to be doing? Where is that money going to be actually spent?
So they're going to work with other agencies. They're going to work with the province. So the province they collect a lot of information, but it's really hard to find. It's really hard to find that information. So I see this person as being an information source. They're going to have information at their fingertips. They're going to make it available to the public. One of the recommendations out of the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan was to have like a GIS program where you could click on different reports. You could go and say, well, what's happening at Jewel Lake, or what's happening at Christine Lake with the water quality? And you'd be able to click on that and find the information that you want. So I see them as somebody who's going to be able to collate all that information and communicate that out to the public. They're going to be doing a lot of outreach and public education, say around riparian area, and how do I protect my shoreline during a flood event? How can is there some flood, like you're going to have a vulcan that happened during that flood that you're never going to be able to protect against, but there are a lot of people that want to know how they can protect their shoreline using vegetation. And so it would, well, maybe they don't. Okay.
So we've got a little bit of an idea, but how will the service benefit or impact residents, ranchers, farmers, or recreational users?
So one of the things, so all of those people, everyone in the boundary wants good water quality. And so that's something that it would work towards. So what I was just talking about with riparian area vegetation, you're going to protect you're going to filter, so that's acting as a filter, and you're going to have cleaner water. So that is one of the benefits.
And
That's
again,
just one of the benefits.
I would come back to that, having a local say in what's going on with our water system, right? I mean, that's part of the challenge is last year, so we have a license to draw water from surface water from the Kettle River. We get a letter that has the name of the river wrong, and it's asking us to voluntarily cut back as an agricultural user by 100% of water use, right? Well, what kind of appropriate governance over our water system is getting a letter from the province that tells us something that doesn't even acknowledge the right river system? It doesn't even. So it's being able to have a back and forth there, to have our own governance, so that with those recreational users or with those agricultural producers, so they can have a say in what's going on in our water system, right? So that we can help. The province instituted that groundwater licensing program, and it was a nightmare to try to navigate that process, right? And so this is the sort of piece where we would be working. We would have some staff resource to work with the province to do that in a way that makes sense for us, whether us in that case is the agricultural producer or somebody else.
Let me jump in and use an example that happened during the flood. Some of you live along McCrae Road. You will know that McRae Creek jumped its banks down by, well, all the way down. And if you've been on the lake, you will have seen that gravel deposit, which is about 8 feet tall, if you're sitting in your kayak looking at it. So here were these people whose yards were solid McRae Creek. I've never seen anything like it, ever, literally. They had waterfalls in their backyard. So I'll tell you who helped them. They got assistance because, and please don't confuse this, because they were the Kettle River group, please don't confuse it as this being the Kettle River that we're asking for. This is boundary. But the people that had been hired as consultants and contractors through the Kettle River project were designated the people to work with those landowners and the province. And I'll tell you what happened when I first mentioned it. I went to Grand Forks, talked to Rolly, talked to Graham Watt, bang. The next day, the hydrologist was out talking to those people. And Jessica and her team worked one-to-one with both those property owners, with the stewardship, who were going to pack fish at one point, and with everybody along there, and they were walked the whole creek. They literally walked the whole creek to see what was happening. What was happening, how far up, and what's the chances of it happening again, and what are we going to do about it? Now, if we hadn't had that third-party group that had that voice straight to the people we needed, we'd have been waiting a long time. And I'm sorry to say that, because it sounds totally horrible to make that statement, but I know that to be true. I know it to be true because, for instance, the weevil that I've been screaming about, and you guys have heard me over and over, and that we spent $50,000 proving that we have. We still don't have an answer to it. Honest to God, they look at us, weevil? What weevil? It's the power. It's the collective power for the boundary region and the voice. And we're going to need that in the future, people.
But Grace, this $160,000 isn't going to be able to buy these professional groups that come in, or how will it help the weevil? I mean, the $160,000 it's really going to go for wages and a building.
There'll be project money. Roby, do you want to hit that?
Yeah, well, and even I want to, Grace's example I think is a good one, because the way, and it comes back to your question earlier about the budgets, right? And it doesn't matter if we save $500,000 in our general budgets, we cannot then take $20,000 and put it towards somebody to help the people around McRae Creek navigate the outcome of that debris flow, right? We're not legally allowed to do that. And so it's that capacity to be able to have somebody to work with the provincial government. We don't want to be the ones that have to pay to fix those problems, right? But we want to have somebody on the ground to fix those problems. And we know in the boundary, we're always forgotten, right? We always get forgotten. So people are paying attention to the Goonies, people paying attention to the Okanagan, and this is our way to make sure that we have that constant pressure to get action on something like that. Right? So likewise with the weevil, we don't want to be the ones having to, you as taxpayers at Christina Lake don't want to be the ones that have to be paying for all the work to deal with that. But we need to make sure that the province recognizes that kind of threat and then keep them on.
So you're saying this person will be more effective than Grace?
I think I could say yes. I think I know Grace well enough that I can say yes. Because that person can help Grace navigate that conversation, right? I mean, that's part of it. The last post-flood,
sounds like a provincial job, though. I mean, it is. You know, why come to us for money? Why not?
I can add, so a lot of the flood recovery is it's being
Sure.
paid for by the province. So this person would have a small role in that, but if there was another event like this, that's all being done by expense authorization forms through the province, and it's being funded that way. So we have Collective Roots, who's been doing a lot of the implementation for the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan. They have all been hired by the recovery team of the regional district to do that work. So that kind of, I think that answers some of your questions.
Okay, we're gonna go to the back to Les, and then we're gonna work our way forward.
So
Okay,
when
everybody?
you say it sounds like a job for the province, the problem I have with that is that once the flood is over, once an emergency is over, now you've what, some provincial department which may or may not actually service the boundary based on people who make decisions about us that don't even know anything about us and are off in Victoria. This would be somebody in our area basically feeding our area, being fed by tax dollars from our area, and dealing specifically with our area and communicating not just with us, but with the province. Whereas if you rely on the province to have somebody located here that's going to manage our stuff, I'm sorry, I don't think the province is going to step up to the plate. I think they're going to find something else to do with their money. That's
Have we
it.
asked the province?
Pardon me?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And we're the hole in the map. We were at a meeting talking about drought management in the spring, and there was a map up on the board, and it didn't. Our whole area was blank. They didn't know where we belonged to. Did we belong to the Okanagan? Did we belong to the Kootenai side?
We're in a blind spot as far as Victoria is concerned.
Yeah, and to
Okay.
answer that, just to make sure, absolutely, we've been asking the province, and Donna's gonna get mad at me when I say this, but my hope with this is that if this referendum, if the voters agree to do this, that the province will be more likely to come to the table, and whatever money the province puts into this would be, assuming that they do, would offset this $160,000.
That doesn't mean.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Nate.
I'm curious, is this person going to have any teeth? For instance, you see mismanagement of creekside areas, say debris, somebody's got old cars, crap like that coming into watershed areas. Is this person going to be able to identify stuff like that and know the proper places to take that to and stuff?
So that's it. So they wouldn't have any teeth. They wouldn't be a bylaw enforcement officer. So if they identify issues or if somebody lets them know about issues, then they would figure out, if there are bylaws that apply or if it's provincial, and then they would be that liaison.
Mary?
Since I became active with Christina Lake Stewardship Society a few
Do you want to
years
stand
ago,
up so they can hear you?
I have been amazed at what this relatively small group does. It's education, it's water monitoring, it's riparian restoration or preservation. It's all part of, and we work with fisheries and oceans and other government groups. We do the monitoring that they don't have time to do. And even though we're a small group, the things that we do to preserve that beautiful body of water is phenomenal. And we couldn't do it without our fearless leader, Brenda LaCroix, our manager. Her knowledge and expertise, her enthusiasm, it's phenomenal. This is the same thing on a larger scale. And we, Christina Lake Stewardship Society, has a bigger voice when we talk to the province about the mussels and things like that than you or I individually has. So this is the same thing. You need to pay the manager. You need to have a group that represents the water in this area. And that's what it's going to do. And how can any of you complain about $5 or $10 or $15 a year to preserve our bodies of water, to protect the shorelines, to protect the quality of the water? I mean, come on, it's a no-brainer.
Does the other part of the regional district have a tax, Roslyn Trail, areas
don't.
A and B? How do they pay for this?
They don't do any watershed management.
Who does? Is nobody over there doing, where the majority of the people in this regional district live, nobody is doing it?
We are.
So,
No, I don't think
There
that's
is
true.
a-
I
there
think
is a
what's happening is Columbia Basin Trust is paying for it. And now, there's two rivers that flow into Lake Roosevelt in Washington. There's the Columbia River drainage and there's the Kettle River drainage. In other words, we're giving our water away to the United States of America and to our neighbors on the other side of our regional district. And nobody is standing up and saying, we should be compensated for the amount of water that leaves here and goes into Lake Roosevelt. Just like the people in the Columbia River drainage are getting compensation. And I'd like to know where Roslyn's water, finally how it winds up in the Columbia River. What river runs out of Roslyn into the Columbia River?
Trail Creek.
Trail Creek. Well, we have more creeks here. We have a river that runs into there. So why aren't you guys standing up for us and getting us involved in being part of the Columbia Basin Trust? Why are we always told we can't do that because if we get in, then the Okanagan will get in and the piece of the pie for everybody will get smaller? Well, when you're not getting any pie at all, that's about as small as it gets. And I think really, you two guys really got to step up to the plate on this.
I fought that for several years when I got in, Dennis, and I think you know that. And if you want proof of that, talk to Margaret Maximenko.
Well, I know because I was at community.
Some of us
so
fought
we did
pretty
study
hard.
this.
Some of us
And we
fought
almost
pretty
had this in, Grace, as you well know.
Okay.
And we were going to get $1 million for every single city and rural area in the
Okay.
boundary. And what
We're not
happened
in-
was, the BC Liberals got in power, it didn't get on the legislative agenda, and we got knocked out. Well, we have people who,
So Dennis,
in the provincial
bringing
politics,
it back to this.
you're asking us for
bringing it back to this
$160,000, Crowley.
So,
We're not telling you there's another place to get money, and you guys aren't even willing to look at it. That's not good for you
I'll give
either.
you an example of something similar. So we do have the Columbia Basin Trust paying for programs that we're doing here for agriculture.
And for broadband.
This sort of program is the same sort of avenue that we'd be able to potentially leverage that relationship, right? We can't do it because we're not organized unless we have a service at the regional district.
Well, why didn't you tell us this in the beginning? Because now all you're you're telling us that we can get this money, but it's not in any of your literature.
Because we can't make promises about things we don't know about, right? So I'm giving you an example.
You
where-
just told me. How am I supposed to?
I'm happy to talk with you afterwards, Dennis.
Okay, can we bring it back to the conversation? Any other?
I got a
Yep,
question.
Go ahead.
What involvement has the United States to do with the water management of this area? Because the Kettle River goes through a big
Yes, it
chunk of
does.
the United States before it comes back to Canada. And I'm just wondering how much involvement they have been, if any.
Yes, they have been involved. Rolly, do you want to?
So with this plan, and this is the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan, and I want to reiterate, like this, the same for most of my constituents, they're on the Granby River, right? Not the Kettle River, but same watershed, right? We're all on the same watershed here. So that plan, we have an advisory table. That's what is the Kettle River Watershed Authority with about 30 seats around that table. They are represented there. So both, we've had First Nations representation from the Colville Confederated Tribes there, as well as, I'm forgetting what her title is, but it comes from
Ferry County?
somewhere in Ferry County, and I just don't remember what her actual title is. So they're involved just because they recognize that connectivity in that, again, that table that sits to help direct work planning and priorities about how we're going to try to implement the outcomes here.
They've also been helping the Christina Lake Stewardship, and the First Nations have been helping the Christina Lake Stewardship. The tribes from down there have been helping test for whatever the hell that fish is. The pike. And they for free for us.
Yes, they have.
So we've got, we've got that partnership working through them, and they've also been part of the Kettle River. So they have been very involved.
So what I'm getting at is are the Americans willing to contribute financially to this?
We haven't asked them for that.
We're not allowed to even ask them,
Why?
because they're not part of our service area.
But
And again-
they use some of the same water. Come on.
But that's international, that's
You know,
international at a higher level.
I mean, theoretically, they could pump all the water out of the river and we wouldn't have any in Grand Forks.
Well, they have a bigger voice to talk about it.
There is,
No, it's a fair question, and again, part of it, I think, for both Grace and I, so from the elected representative position, I think both of us have been hesitant to go down the path of asking for a referendum on this service in the past, because we didn't feel like it was necessarily worth it. Now, I'll speak for myself, Louise.
Yeah.
I feel like, now, I feel like it's worth it. So I was actively opposed to the idea of going to referendum until this last winter, basically. And then I made the decision, okay, I feel like the value is there, we can demonstrate this. And part of it is to be able to have that service at the regional district so that we have something sustainable, so that we can go and ask whether it is CBT or whether it is the provincial government to say, okay, we would like some help in delivering these things. Because up until now, it's been this temporary 3-year window that Donna mentioned, and then this last year where we really just focused at trying to build a drought management plan to assist water purveyors in managing drought response, right? So we haven't been at a point where we could constructively ask for any of those things, I don't think, so far, because we didn't know what our future would be.
I think the flood brought a lot of it to a head, and the fires, and all of those extreme events we've been going through. And Rolly's right, I was not in favor of this either, up until now. But now, everything I've seen, we need to have a stronger voice. And the only way we're going to have a stronger voice is to collectively work together. So bringing it back, this is your choice. This is your choice as taxpayers. That's why it's coming to referendum. Rolly and I are not standing here saying you must do this or you must not do that. We are saying, we are trying to give you as much information, and the reason that we've come from, we didn't want to do it to we do want to do it, and share that with you and leave you with something to think about before you come and vote. The secret to this is that you do need to come and vote. Because you don't have a director that you're voting for, people will become very complacent and not come and vote. And really seriously, it's important. It's really important that you come out and vote. Yeah.
Okay, the farm regional district goes all the way to Big White. From Midway to Big White, there's nothing mentioned. There's a lot of farms and ranches and everything along the way. Are they going to be included?
Yes. Yes.
How come there's been no word out along there that there's been this referendum type?
Oh yeah, Vicky's having all kinds of meetings.
And they got the same newsletter. It went to every boundary area resident,
And her,
the newsletter.
and Vicki just hasn't, her meetings, I don't know what the dates are yet. I don't know if she is.
She hasn't had them yet.
But I think she's got 2 or 3 meetings that she's planning in various parts of the West Boundary.
Same as what
for the
we're
same-
having here now?
Yes.
Exact same.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It's the same question that's
Yes.
going to everybody, doesn't matter where you live in the boundary, same information that's coming out to you. So these meetings will look, like Grace and I obviously won't be at all of Vicky's meetings, but same questions across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's having one, Big White, Rock Creek, and then we're looking at combining with all candidates' meetings in Midway and Grand Forks.
Yeah.
So, and this newsletter, that went, did everyone get one of these?
Yes.
Yeah, so that went all the way to Big White.
Did you have a question?
Yes, you answered the one question. It's because there was a lot of people from Grand Forks. A few of us came tonight because we found out that this was happening. So there will be another meeting connecting with the all candidates.
Yes.
And it should have been in the paper
It
hopefully
was. I
today
saw
or
it.
yesterday.
Yeah.
And it will be at 5 p.m. on the Thursday, just before all candidates for the mayors and the school trustees.
Okay, 5 p.m. on Thursday. Okay.
Yes.
It will be, so, and there are two actually, because we've agreed to present both at that time and then along with all candidates. So just a repeat of that same
So it'll be
presentation.
either one if you go,
Yeah.
yeah, and they'll be both at 5 PM.
And then the next one's at 6.
So just to make sure we're clear on that,
Yeah.
Thursday, 5 PM, we're
Okay.
gonna have an hour conversation very similar to this.
Okay.
And then Donna, you're saying Thursday at 6 PM to intro to all candidates. There'll be a update on the referendum. But if you want to go to a forum like this to ask questions, you have to get there at 5, because we're not going to have a bunch of questions at 6.
It's going to be the same location as the all candidates debate.
It'll be in the multi-purpose room or the bistro of the high school. So same location, but not in the main auditorium, but in the little cafeteria. whatever it's called.
Mike has a question. And then we're gonna wrap it up.
Thanks. It seems to me that there's a relationship between the two meetings that we had tonight. And my initial inclination was that this business of electoral reform is a lot of money for maybe not a lot of advantage. But listening to Donna's presentation tonight, I potentially see an advantage. And that is if your candidate is in first past the post situation, is not from the governing party, and you have a second candidate that can represent your voice in the legislature from a different party, maybe that gives you a better into provincial government contacts and money and building relationships than is possible under the present situation. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. Second question was administrative one. Is there a possibility for a vote where you don't have to be there in person? In other words, by internet or some other method?
So that, I'm not an expert on that. So that's our manager of corporate administration, Teresa Lenardin, and her name is on here. So if you want to ask
Okay,
that
well,
question.
my problem is on the 10th, I have a cataract operation, and on the 26th, we're in Vancouver. So
I
either
think
of those dates, I can vote.
Okay, I have your contact information, so I can ask Teresa that on Monday
Okay,
and get
all
back
right,
to you.
good.
There is a
Now,
Thank you.
this is not a, pile of money, I guess they're asking for us. I have a concern that the regional district directors, on their own, without going to the membership of the RDKB, can decide whether or not to extend this person's contract. Sort of doing a little arithmetic, it's a job at about 80K. So that's a person with probably 10 years experience after some time in university. So it should be a person with a certain level of pizzazz and competency and probably can represent us well, maybe. But it would be nice to know the accountability that this person provides back to the people that have agreed to fund this position. In other words, how do we know what that person is doing on our behalf? So it would be good to have that question answered. Now, when this meeting came up, there were two things in my mind, and they were floods and fires. And I see very little information in the information from the RDKB website. I mean, they're referred to, but there's a lot of other stuff which comes from long-term development of the Kettle River Water Management Plan in terms of wildlife and fish. Now, were this riparian situation in place, would that have had an impact on the flood let go on McCrae Creek, which resulted in a heck of a mess? And for people that are concerned about kokanee spawning in the streams, there aren't going to be a lot of kokanee spawning in McCrae Creek this year, unfortunately, maybe next year, if the remediation work is able to be completed. The very little information about fires and what we might need to do to reduce our fire risk in this community. We know it's an old growth, mature forest, so the risk is really high. In another season, which is hot and dry, followed by lightning storms on dry ground. So, you know, I would like to see this position involved in long-term planning. Who is going to, you know, buy the land up the Granby River and the West Kettle and the Kettle River to build dams to hold the water in place in a situation where you get an early spring melt due to a rapid snow melt that would mitigate floods and also provide water reservoir to deal with a drought situation that many folks are concerned about. So, you know, in principle, I have a buy-in. Maybe I don't totally speak for my board, the Waterfront Property Owners Society. So, you know, a waterfront parcel, standard waterfront parcel, no improvements is $25 a year. It's $500K is what these parcels are going for these days, unfortunately. So that's not a lot of money, and you know, I guess we can afford it. It's a case of here, so not really a big deal. But I think that it's important that we get value from this individual, and the person selection process by the RDKB will be critical in terms of finding the right person. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Okay, all right.
Can I quickly answer two of those questions?
I'd like to.
Okay.
But I'll see what you do.
I thought you
So
might.
the two questions one piece is your comment about like flood management or mitigation or that sort of thing. This is the sort of position we can't go down that path unless we have some human resource that's going to help us navigate what that looks like. And so one of the recommendations, for example, is to look at those kinds of issues. This would be the sort of position that would then have the capacity to do that. The other piece I want to mention is you talked about the 6 boundary directors being the ones, so we need a 2/3 vote basically from those directors to continue this service. That thing about that the other way around. Instead of it's basically a clause that we built into that bylaw to make sure that if it's not working, it doesn't keep going forever. And so, given that there's 6 boundary directors and that's a 2/3 vote, that means that we need to have two of 6 directors say, no, this isn't working, and it won't go forward. Okay? So it's not the boundary directors, because everything has to go to the board. So after it gets past that, it still has to get approved by the board.
Okay,
I just wanted to say, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
About the riparian area, I was up in the helicopter a couple times during the floods. I was the planning section chief in Grand Forks during the flood event and response. And the helicopter pilot, after he'd been flown all the river several times, he said, I didn't get poplars before, I get poplar trees now. Because wherever I see those poplar trees, the river's still there, the land is still there. And that was there are still places, of course, where you have no control over it, because we had almost I don't think they're saying it's 1 in 1,000 years now on the Granby, but it was significant. We saw islands created and things like that.
Okay, I hope that helps, you guys. And like I say, the reason it's coming to referendum is because this is your choice as a community. Okay? Thanks for coming out. I really, really appreciate it.